In politics, as with life, there are moments you have to take the bad with the good. And if you're on the right side of the political spectrum, over the past few days, you've had a lot to feel really good about. If you're a supporter of Donald Trump, there's been a slew of polls that have come out that make his position look very strong, not only in the Republican primary, but up against his probably inevitable opponent, Joe Biden. His legal problems seem to be getting some traction as far as getting himself resolved of them, or unstuck from them is probably a better way to say it. If you're keeping an eye on the Congress, there have been some good policy wins, some things that you've been looking forward to seeing for a little while. So it's in that light that when a piece of bad news comes along, it really stings all the more. On Thursday, the Congress passed a reauthorization of the National Defense Act. But in doing so, they dealt conservatives and civil libertarians in general a piece of bad news they definitely did not want to see. What am I talking about? Hang on, folks. I'll explain to you here in just 1 second.
My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk.
On Thursday, the U.S. House of Representatives followed action by the Senate, passing a compromised version of the National Defense Authorization Act. Under normal circumstances, it's a bipartisan bill that gets very little hassle as far as fights between Democrats and Republicans. But over the past few years, the NDAA has become something of a political football, and this year is no different. Not only were there ideological fights, there was one piece of the NDAA that's caused civil libertarians and conservatives in general a lot of heartburn, and you can't really blame them considering everything that's involved. So we'll start with NBCnews.com. Headline: Congress passes $886 billion defense policy bill, Biden to sign into law. The bill includes a 4-month extension of Section 702, a controversial surveillance authority, giving lawmakers more time to either reform it or keep the program. From the Reuters news service, Washington. More than 2/3 of the U.S. House of Representatives voted in favor of a defense policy bill on Thursday that includes a record $886 billion in annual military spending and authorizes policies such as aid for Ukraine and pushback against China in the Indo-Pacific. The House backed the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, by a vote of 310 to 118, with strong support from Republicans and Democrats. It was more than the 2/3 majority required to pass the measure and send it to the White House for President Joe Biden to sign into law. Separate from the appropriations bills that set government spending levels, the NDAA authorizes everything from pay raises for troops — this year it will be 5.2%, to purchases of ships, ammunition, and aircraft. Because it is one of the few pieces of legislation that becomes law every year, members of Congress use it as a vehicle for a wide range of initiatives. It is also closely watched by major defense companies such as Lockheed Martin, RTX Corp., and other firms that receive Department of Defense contracts. The vote for this year's bill, which is nearly 3,100 pages long and authorizes a record $886 billion, is up 3% from last year, meant that Congress had passed the NDAA for 63 straight years. The final version of the NDAA left out provisions addressing divisive social issues such as access to abortion and treatment of transgender service members that had been included in the version passed by the Republican majority House over the objection of Democrats, threatening to derail the legislation. The Democratic-controlled Senate backed the NDAA, also with a strong bipartisan majority of 87 to 13 on Wednesday. The fiscal 2024 NDAA also includes a 4-month extension of a disputed domestic surveillance authority giving lawmakers more time to either reform or keep the program, known as Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or what we commonly call FISA. Reading a little bit further into the article, that provision faced objections in both the Senate and the House, but not enough to derail the bill. The Senate defeated an attempt to remove the FISA extension from the NDAA on Wednesday before voting to pass the defense measure. The House and the Senate had each passed their own versions of the NDAA earlier this year. The measure approved this week was a compromise between the two parties and the two chambers. The bill extends one measure to help Ukraine, the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, through the end of 2026, authorizing $300 million for the program in the fiscal year ending September 30, 2024, and the next one. However, that figure is a tiny amount compared to the $61 billion in assistance for Ukraine Biden had asked Congress to approve to help Kiev as it battles a Russian invasion that began in February 2022. That emergency spending request is bogged down in Congress as Republicans have refused to approve assistance for Ukraine without Democrats agreeing to a significant toughening of immigration law. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with lawmakers at the Capitol on Tuesday to make his case for the funding requested by Biden, but emerged from the meetings without Republican commitments. Okay, let's get into this. Oh, mercy. I said the National Defense Authorization Act is one of those things that, under normal circumstances, is a bipartisan bill, gets passed with little fuss, no muss. And for 63 straight years, it has passed. In the past few years, however, the NDAA has become a hot potato. Now, I said that you have to take the bad with the good. Well, I'm sorry. We may have passed this now for what is the 63rd straight year, but there's not a lot in the NDAA that just passed that should make conservatives or even civil libertarians happy. My first problem with all this is the fact that we had a chance to do something about FISA. You remember the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 702, that's currently being used to monitor the activities of Americans? Look, I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, liberal, or conservative. The idea of giving the state more power to keep an eye on us, the American citizen, is very, very worrisome to me. Everybody acknowledges that we need to do something to reform this. Well, let me rephrase that. A significant number of people on both sides of the political aisle and both sides of the political spectrum acknowledge that something needs to be done about this. As a matter of fact, there were bills prepared to do just that. Take a look at this. This is from the Washington Examiner, article by Reese Gorman from 2 days ago. Speaker Johnson reverses course again on FISA and pulls both bills. Neither of the two bills to reauthorize and reform a powerful spy tool used by the American intelligence agencies will be voted on this week after the Rules Committee pulled the legislation amid intense backlash. Representative Thomas Massey, who sits on the Rules Committee, confirmed to the Washington Examiner that neither the House Judiciary Committee nor the Intelligence Committee bills to reauthorize and reform Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act would be voted on this week. The original plan was to put both bills on the floor and allow members to vote for them. Whichever one received the most votes would be the one the House advanced. But after a heated conference meeting where Representative Warren Davidson, Republican Ohio, who sits on the Judiciary Committee and helped craft that version of the bill, accused Intelligence Committee Chair Mike Turner, Republican of Ohio, of effing lying about the Judiciary bill, the tide started to shift away from the Queen of the Hill scenario. After a meeting, multiple members expressed dissatisfaction with the tactic and wanted Speaker Mike Johnson to choose one bill and stick with it. I think the former speaker said it very well when he said we should take the time to get just one bill and take the time to get it right, said Representative Darrell Issa, member of the Judiciary Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, we had an opportunity to reform Section 702 of the FISA Act, which is the primary vehicle that allows the intelligence community to monitor the activity of Americans inside their own border. And what did Speaker MAGA Mike Johnson do? He ixnayed both bills, said, no, we'll put it off till next year, and then allowed FISA to go into the NDAA, let it pass, let it stand as it is, and we just keep rolling it down the road. A situation we know we need to reform, we know needs to be addressed, and yet our congressional leaders, our elected representatives, are doing nothing about it. Now, I can't say they're all not doing something about it. I give Jim Jordan and the Intelligence Committee credit. They tried to put a bill on the floor that would reform it and make it better and take away some of the power from the surveillance state. They didn't get that far. So there's my first problem with the NDAA. Furthermore, the House version, which was starting to address some of the social issues that were creeping into an NDAA bill, which frankly shouldn't be there in the first place, all of them have been left intact. Things like, the military paying for abortions, a whole bunch of social issues that shouldn't even be part of a national defense bill are still there, and they're still going to be allowed to go on in the military. I'm sorry, the military has one very simple job: be the most lethal fighting force on the planet in preparation to defend the nation. Yet a lot of social, experimental stuff keeps creeping into the NDAA, therefore keeps creeping into the military, and as opposed to addressing it, which I thought conservative Republicans were going to do if they got a hold of power, no, they're not going to fight that fight. We'll just let it go on down the road. I have a question. What's the point of electing Republicans if they're not actually going to do something about the stuff they say they don't like? What's the point of sending them back to office if they're not going to represent the people that they purport to represent? Here would have been a really good opportunity for them to do so, and they're doing nothing about it. So, as usual, we talk and nothing changes. When does this start to end? When does it start to change? And by the way, I'm not the only person that feels this way. Take a look at this. Simon Atiba, who I absolutely love as far as a reporter on Capitol Hill, made the following observations on his Twitter page. Was this a betrayal of the base? In case you were not paying attention, the House of Representatives, under the leadership of Mike Johnson, passed the Defense Policy Bill, an $886 billion legislation that was stripped of all the demands by the Republican base on abortion, diversity, and transgender rights. Note, the bill, called the NDAA, was passed by a vote of 310 to 118 and had already been approved by the Senate. The bill includes money for Ukraine and Israel, includes more warrantless spying on Americans, includes more funded abortions, and things like sex change operations. The only good part about this, from Atiba's perspective, the NDAA covers various aspects of national defense, including military partnerships, structural improvements at the Defense Department facilities, a 5.2% pay raise for military personnel, which I agree with, by the way, procurement of new weapons and missile defense systems, and other national security priorities. And note, the bill includes a temporary reauthorization of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which extends and expands surveillance on Americans inside the United States, including things like Wi-Fi at coffee shops, libraries, and virtually everything else. And you begin to wonder why guys like me get upset at moments like this. I'm sorry, this one is purely on Speaker Mike Johnson. You had two different bills that would have addressed Section 702 of the FISA Act. And as opposed to saying, you know what, this is what we're going to do, I say we bring this one. This seems like the stronger and the better bill. Let's bring it to the floor. No, he had two bills, couldn't make up his mind which one he wanted, and therefore couldn't even split the baby in a Solomon-like manner, and therefore neither one of them got to the floor, and FISA keeps on going right down the road with more warrantless surveillance of American citizens. So yeah, if you're on the right side of the political perspective, there's been a lot to celebrate this week, but I'll tell you what, I have absolutely got to hold my nose on this one, because this NDAA, which under normal circumstances I wouldn't necessarily get cranky about, stinks to high heaven. It's chucked full of stuff that shouldn't even be there. The NDAA ought to be about one thing and one thing only: Are we providing money to pay our military? Are we providing money for new weapons? Are we providing money to maintain the weapons we've got? In other words, just about all things military and nothing else. Section 702, reauthorizing Section 702 of FISA should never have been in this NDAA bill. It should have been stripped out immediately. But as NBC points out, this was a compromise bill, and boy, what a compromise. I'm not so sure I'd call it a compromise as much as I'd call it a sellout, because that's what it feels like. But anyway, that's what I think about it. What do you think? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number 1, if you're not a subscriber to my channel, please do so. Number 2, please leave a comment below. I'd love to know what you think about all this. Number 3, please hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when new videos, new live streams are coming out. Number 4, please share the video around. And finally, give me a thumbs up. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I will see you next time.